Hello, students. Welcome to Social Studies, King George III versus Thomas Paine and Common Sense. Let's start by looking at King George III. It's going to be hard for you to read this on the slide, so if you have a hard copy, pull that out and follow along as I read. King George III. King George III, King of England from 1760 to 1820, played a vital role in colonists' pursuit of independence from the country of which he rules. Britain would win the French and Indian War. It would ultimately lose the Revolutionary War. King of both Great Britain and Ireland, he especially became interested in taxing colonists so that more money could be generated to pay debts formed from the French and Indian War. A tax is money that people pay to the government for services. King George III could not understand why the colonists did not want to pay taxes. King George III angered colonists by taxing them. Not letting them have a voice in the British Parliament angered them more. No taxation without representation was the motto of many colonists. Colonists often spoke out against King George III. In 1765, the British Parliament passed the Stamp Act, a tax on newspapers, contracts, court documents, and pamphlets. Of the many people speaking out against King George III, the Sons of Liberty were well organized and decided that they would no longer tolerate the taxes given. Dressed as Native Americans, the Sons of Liberty in December of 1773 boarded ships carrying tea, and they dumped tons of it into the waters of the Boston Harbor. This became known as the Boston Tea Party. The British Parliament did not respond well to this act of protest. They would further try to tax the colonists. This would lead to more conflicts between the British and the colonists, leading to war. The Revolutionary War would eventually be won by the colonists, leading to their independence from England's rule. He would develop a blood disease many years after the American Revolution ended. King George III would become mentally unstable. He would talk without stopping. He would eventually become blind and increasingly deaf. He died at 81 years old. He is one of the longest reigning kings in history. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at the next person, Thomas Paine, and his article or his pamphlet or booklet called Common Sense. It says selling more than 100,000 copies of Common Sense within the first 3 weeks, Thomas Paine heavily impacted colonial America's separation from England. His pamphlet was printed in 1776. Paine's 46-page booklet stated that was the only sensible answer to the conflict between Britain and the colonies. Thomas Paine did not come to the colonies until 1774. He was inspired by the Patriots' fight for freedom. He called in a new era in politics. Paine was a talented writer who used words wisely. He wrote that it was foolish for a big piece of land like North America to be controlled by a tiny island in Europe. Paine wrote that the role of King George III to the colonists was meaningless. He said that the disagreement between the British and colonists could never be fixed. It was the belief of Paine's that the British could be easily beaten by the Continental Army. He donated 100% of the profit of his pamphlet to the Continental Army's fight against the British. The timing of Common Sense's release had tremendous influence on the writing of the Declaration of Independence 6 months after its publication. What made it successful was how easy it was to read, the strong language, and lastly, it was short enough to keep the attention of the reader.